A child was born in the shadow of a stone that pulsed with something the galaxy couldn't name. And no one noticed. His name would not echo through wars or scream from the pages of ancient scrolls. He did not come from bloodlines, or prophecy, or battle. He came from silence. The asteroid had no name worth remembering. It was deep in the outer rim, a fragment of a shattered planet, orbiting an unstable star, rich in minerals, poor in everything else. But in the cracks of its surface, something moved. The boy who would become Darth Vectivus lived here. And from the beginning, he understood things he had no right to understand. He didn't cry when he was born. He simply stared. His family called it calm. But it wasn't. It was calculation. By the time he was 5, he could plot the trajectory of mining drones before the engineers even programmed them. He could hear vibrations in the rock walls that others ignored, rhythms that matched no known machinery. He would sit for hours in silence, not lost in imagination, but deep in geometry. Some children imagined monsters in the dark. He mapped them. The others avoided the old tunnels, where equipment would fail and voices would echo that weren't quite human. He would go there alone. He would listen. He would wait. And something waited with him. His parents worked for the mining guild. His life was safe, structured, quiet. No abuse, no betrayal, no tragedy to explain what he would become. That was the mystery. He was not broken. He was listening. And the asteroid was speaking. By the time he turned 12, he had built devices to measure things no one else could detect. Fluctuations in gravimetric density. Interference patterns that moved through rock like breath through lungs. Once he swore he heard a voice speak his name. Not out loud. Inside the stone. No one believed him. But he didn't argue. He simply marked the data. The force had not touched him yet. He could not move objects. He had no visions. But deep in the crust of that cursed asteroid, he felt something that was not light. Not dark. Just waiting. And it mirrored him. There was no inciting incident. No single event to blame. Only the slow erosion of normalcy, one whisper at a time. He was not chosen by fate. He was not marked by prophecy. He walked willingly into the dark, because it made sense. And when he closed his eyes at night, he did not dream of stars. He dreamed of tunnels that led deeper than space allowed. He dreamed of voices that sounded like his own thoughts. He dreamed of standing in a chamber that did not exist, with something ancient watching him mine, through his own reflection. And in the dream, he did not run. He watched it back. He wasn't lonely. He was alone. And there is a difference. As the years passed, the boy became a student, and the student became something more. He devoured knowledge, physics, chemistry, subatomic structures. Not to escape, to understand. The asteroid was his world, and its language wasn't spoken. It was measured. He began keeping notebooks, dozens of them, filled not with feelings, but with numbers. Equations for sound distortion, energy absorption ratios, the resonance frequencies of different mineral veins, some of which weren't listed in any Republic database. He wasn't force-sensitive, not yet, but he was aware. He noticed when a datapad drained faster near the tunnel walls. He noticed when workers experienced vertigo in identical grid patterns. He noticed when a droid refused to enter a shaft that had never been mapped, and no one could explain why. Others dismissed it as faulty programming. He wrote down the angle of its hesitation. He began skipping meals to observe shifts in electromagnetic noise. He stopped speaking during meals altogether. He wasn't antisocial. He just had nothing to say. The asteroid wasn't just a place to him. It was a puzzle, a whispering riddle, one that didn't want to be solved, one that responded when ignored, one that listened back. And in the silence of space, where night and day had no meaning, his mind began to stretch beyond its limits. He started to feel patterns before seeing them. Solutions came to him uninvited. Problems that once took hours now unraveled in seconds. He once predicted a mining accident 6 hours before it happened. He didn't stop it. He just watched it unfold, exactly as the math told him it would. The other children thought he was strange. The adults thought he was brilliant. But no one truly knew him. Not because he hid himself. Because there was no self to reveal. Only observation. He didn't ask who he was. He asked what the asteroid was. And slowly, the question shifted. From, "What is this place?" to, "Why does it feel like it's waiting for something?" By the time he turned 16, he had charted a complete energy field map of the inner tunnels. He found cold spots where no heat should have escaped. He measured echoes that returned before the sound had finished leaving his lips. He felt time stutter in the narrow passages. And always the feeling of being watched. Not stalked. Not hunted. Witnessed. He tried once to talk to a guild researcher about the readings. The man laughed, patted his shoulder, and said, "Son, some rocks are just haunted. Let them be." But he couldn't. Because haunted things don't repeat your breath. As you exhale. The miners called it cursed. The officials called it unstable. He called it alive. The asteroid had long since stopped behaving like ordinary stone. Drills overheated. Cameras flickered. Navigation systems spun in circles underground, claiming they'd exited real space. But only one person paid attention. Only one stayed long enough to see the pattern. He did not name the darkness. He documented it. It began with shadows. Not tricks of light. Real shadows, with no source. They moved when no one was near. They stretched toward warmth. And sometimes they paused. Miners started seeing things. Family members who weren't there. Hallways that didn't exist. One man collapsed, whispering apologies to a wife he hadn't spoken to in years. The boy took notes. He catalogued the hallucinations. He found correlations between emotional trauma and spatial distortion. He discovered that those with grief saw more. He began to wonder. Was the asteroid responding to pain? Or feeding on it? He didn't fear it. He respected it. He once sat alone in Shaft 19 for 8 hours. No lights, no gear, no sensors. He simply sat and listened. What he heard didn't speak in words. It spoke in reflections. In flickers of thought that weren't his, but understood him. He returned to that place again and again. Not seeking power. Seeking consistency. And it gave him exactly what he asked for. Clarity. It began to change how he thought. Not just what he noticed, but how he noticed. He became aware of the space between cause and effect. of the hidden motives behind spoken words, of the temperature of a lie and the weight of a memory. He once walked past a team of workers, paused, and whispered, "You shouldn't go down there today." They asked why. He only shook his head. That night, the ceiling collapsed. 3 men died. He felt no guilt, no relief, only confirmation. The force still did not bend to his will, but it had begun circling him, like a patient animal. He wrote less. He knew more. He began sleeping underground, near the pulse zones, places where energy behaved strangely and time moved slower. He said he felt safe there. When asked why, he replied, "Because everything else goes quiet." He didn't mean the sounds. He meant the thoughts. There were days he didn't speak at all. Nights he didn't blink. His family tried to pull him back. Meals, traditions, celebrations. But he had crossed into a rhythm they could not hear. He had begun to orbit something deeper than gravity. And every time he returned to the surface, it felt wrong. He did not know the name Sith. He did not crave the dark side. He simply believed that truth was not found in light. It was found in places where others were too afraid to look. And the asteroid never slept. He found the chamber by accident. Or at least, that is what he told himself. The tunnel had collapsed days earlier, opening a fracture no map accounted for. Engineers sealed it off. Sensors malfunctioned near it. Everyone avoided it on instinct, the kind of instinct that comes from old fear, not new danger. But he felt pulled toward it. Not lured, summoned. He entered alone, crawling through sharp stone, dust clinging to his breath. The air grew colder the deeper he moved. Not the cold of weather, the cold of absence, of something waiting without moving. He reached a hollow space, wider than it should have been. The ceiling curved unnaturally smooth. The walls pulsed faintly, as if reflecting a heartbeat that wasn't his. At the center was nothing, and yet everything. A distortion hung in the air like a wound in the world, barely visible, barely real. A place where vision bent inward and the corners of the mind tightened. He didn't run. He stepped closer. For the first time in his life, he felt the force react to him. Not like a gift, not like a curse, more like recognition. He reached out with his hand. The distortion rippled as if exhaling. A low hum pressed against his bones. His senses stretched. Not outward, inward. He saw flashes. Not visions. Memories that did not belong to him. Miners who died decades earlier. A woman whispering a name that wasn't his. A child standing in the dark, staring into a mirror that showed a man he had never met. He touched nothing, and touched everything. His mind didn't fracture. It widened. He saw the asteroid not as stone, but as a scar left behind by an ancient presence, something that fed on echoes of emotion, not to destroy, but to reflect. A mirror of suffering, thought, and fear. A place where the dark side pooled quietly, patiently, without hunger. Most would have fled. He stepped deeper. A sharp tone pierced the air. His breath caught. Time stretched thin, like fabric pulled to its limit. He saw himself older, colder, wearing robes he did not recognize. His eyes reflected calm, and something colder than cruelty. Then the image vanished. The chamber returned. The distortion faded. His heartbeat steadied. He did not question what he saw. He only asked why he had been allowed to see it. When he emerged hours later, dust covering his clothes, his family thought he looked tired. But exhaustion wasn't the word. He looked aligned. He did not speak of the chamber. He did not return to the surface right away. The asteroid felt different now, not threatening, not comforting. It felt familiar. A veil had opened, and he had stepped through it without hesitation. Not because he desired power. Not because he feared weakness. Because the dark did not frighten him. It made sense. And somewhere deep below, beyond stone and silence, something finally whispered back. The asteroid had made him. Now it began to unmake others. By the time he reached his early 30s, Vectivus had risen to regional director of operations within the mining guild. He wore a suit. He sat at meetings. He was respected. But beneath the surface, his mind remained in tunnels that no one else dared speak of. To his colleagues, he was rational, efficient. To the miners, he was a shadow that moved through the station without making sound. No one ever accused him of wrongdoing. But no one trusted the rooms he lingered in either. Then the disappearances began. First, a technician, then a surveyor. Both cases ended in confusion. No blood, no signs of struggle, just equipment left behind running. Security logs showed no exit. The station AI flagged environmental errors that didn't exist. And in every case, the same pattern. They'd all reported dreams. Some said they saw family members in the mines. Others described old regrets walking beside them, asking questions that never ended. One man jumped into a thermal vent after reporting a voice telling him he was still asleep. Vectivus did not panic. He catalogued each case. He cross-referenced emotional instability with magnetic variance. He triangulated dream content with planetary alignment. To him, none of this was supernatural. It was consistent. He proposed a theory to the board that the asteroid held a form of residual energy, not unlike the effects of mass trauma on Jedi battlefields. They laughed. He didn't defend it. He only continued his work. He started isolating variables. Environmental controls, pressure changes. He noticed the anomalies increased during silence. They faded during argument, and surged when no one was watching. Then came the miners' union report. It accused the guild of ignoring health risks, citing mental instability, auditory hallucinations, and emotional degradation. Vectivus offered to investigate on their behalf, but he didn't report what he found. Instead, he began constructing a private research wing deep within the asteroid's spine, funded quietly, overseen personally. He installed soundproofed chambers, gravity isolators, neural resonance recorders. He invited those most affected by the anomalies to speak with him directly. He listened. They cried. Some screamed. He wrote everything down. And after each session, the same thing happened. They forgot what they said. One man wept about his son for 20 minutes. Then asked why he was there. He didn't have a son. Vectivus noted the drop in temperature around the man's seat. He ran a spectral density scan on the air. The results didn't match any known energy pattern. It wasn't haunting. It wasn't madness. It was memory, preserved in layers, like sediment in stone. Only now, it had begun to rise. The asteroid wasn't hiding the past. It was repeating it. And Vectivus was the only one listening carefully enough to hear it. Some believed the asteroid was cursed. Vectivus knew better. It was remembering. He began mapping the visions, not by belief, but by data. He charted every location where someone saw a face that wasn't there. Every place where footsteps echoed wrong. Every room where thoughts arrived too early. Patterns emerged. Not random, not chaotic. Structured. He realized the events were not illusions, not in the way people assumed. They were repetitions. Replays. What others called ghosts, he called remnants. Memories, preserved not in minds, but in matter. Stone had memory. That was the secret. Under certain conditions, stress, trauma, death, the force did not move on. It imprinted. It echoed. The asteroid was full of echoes. He built a scanner tuned to detect emotional residue. He called it a resonance trace array. The first test nearly ruptured its own casing. The readings weren't just strong. They were layered. Each space held multiple timelines at once, fragments of different people, overlapping like unfinished thoughts. One corridor near the reactor core registered a complete silence field. No sound, no temperature shift, no resonance. It was blank. He returned 6 hours later. The field had changed. Now it played back voices not out loud, but through subharmonic pulses his instruments could interpret. The voices cried for help. One voice recited old mining logs. Another simply whispered the word "stay" on a loop. He didn't speak of these findings. The guild wouldn't understand. They wanted ore. But the ore was part of it. He discovered certain mineral deposits amplified the effect. Others dampened it. The asteroid wasn't just remembering. It was built to remember. Not by design, by suffering. He started cutting samples by hand. He took them to the private chamber. He recorded his own thoughts while holding them. The samples reacted. Sometimes faint light shimmered across the surface. Sometimes nothing. But once, just once, he heard his own voice answer back a question he hadn't asked yet. He stopped breathing. The moment passed. The sample went cold. But it had happened. He began to suspect the truth. This wasn't simply a place of memory. It was a library. Unspoken, unwritten, encoded in sorrow. Every death, every regret, every thought left behind in silence. Recorded. And if that was true, he began to wonder what it meant for the Force. If energy could trap memory and memory could echo, then consciousness might not end. It might fracture. He began recording his own reflections daily, but not in journals. He spoke to the asteroid itself. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, he felt it listening. Not passively, not curiously, actively. The ore no longer felt like rock. It felt like memory, shaped by grief. And he was learning how to read it. Fear behaves differently in closed environments. On ships, it leaks into the air like gas shared, denied, and dispersed. On planets, it escapes into horizon and sky. But on the asteroid, it had nowhere to go. Vectivus knew this. He didn't theorize it. He measured it. He designed a set of chambers buried beneath the reactor core. Each one sealed. Each one shielded from outside influence. Into each, he brought volunteers. People who had already experienced symptoms, the whispers, the sights, the forgetting. He told them it was a wellness trial. No one questioned him. Inside, they were alone, but not unobserved. Vectivus monitored every breath, every vocal tremor, every fluctuation in heart rate. He tracked when fear began the moment it detached from rational thought and took on its own shape. It happened faster in the dark, faster in silence, faster when mirrors were present. One subject wept when the lights dimmed. Another tried to claw her way through solid walls. A third smiled the entire time, but did not blink for 7 hours. When asked what he saw, the third subject said, "She kept asking me if I forgave her. I never told her yes, but I think I wanted to." He had no idea who she was. Vectivus noted the phrasing. He wasn't studying hallucinations. He was studying patterns. Each subject's fear followed a structure, a shape. Loss, guilt, regret. The asteroid wasn't creating new terror. It was amplifying what already lived beneath the surface. And that made it predictable. He expanded the experiments. Subjects were given different lighting schemes, noise intervals, oxygen levels. Some chambers played soft echoes from previously recorded sessions. Others were completely sterile, devoid of input, sound, or sensory trigger. In both, subjects still experienced visions. That meant the origin wasn't external. The asteroid was drawing it out from within. At times, Vectivus entered the chambers himself. Not to test, to feel. He sat in perfect stillness. No recordings, no safeguards, and he listened. He began to feel a pressure behind his thoughts, as if something were trying to enter. Not his mind, but his memory. He did not resist. He let it search. And what came back was not horror. It was understanding, a mutual exchange. He offered clarity. The asteroid offered feeling. Not emotions, feeling. Textures of thought. Weight behind memory. The shape of a person's fear when it is no longer hidden. He left the chamber with tears on his face, but no sadness in his heart. He understood now. The asteroid wasn't causing fear. It was revealing it. And if fear could be revealed, it could be studied. If it could be studied, it could be taught. The workers still suffered. Many left. Some were reassigned. The guild sent inquiries. Vectivus sent reports. Clean, logical, incomplete. Because the truth didn't belong in the report. It belonged in the stone. And the stone was ready to teach him more. There comes a point where science cannot follow, where numbers lose their meaning, where the boundary between observation and experience disappears. Vectivus reached that point in the lowest levels of the asteroid. It began with a single anomaly, a pocket of ore that refused to be cut. Tools broke against it. Energy drills shut down. Every attempt to extract it ended in failure. He descended alone, carrying only a scanner and a single glow rod. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with something he could not name. Not danger. Not warning. Expectation. The ore vein pulsed faintly, like a dormant heart. His scanner malfunctioned the moment he approached. Data dissolved. Numbers scattered across the display. The readings made no sense. So he turned it off. He placed his hand against the stone. It was warm. A breath escaped his lips, slow, steady, controlled. And then, something shifted. The ore responded, not physically, not visibly, but mentally. A pressure built behind his thoughts, familiar and yet deeper than anything he had felt before. He closed his eyes. Immediately, memories surfaced. Not his. Not anyone's alive. A miner dying alone in a tunnel collapse. A child lost during an evacuation decades earlier. A woman burying her face in her hands after learning her partner would never return. These weren't visions. They weren't illusions. They were recordings, preserved impressions, etched into the stone. He breathed slowly, letting the memories wash over him like cold water. They did not frighten him. They aligned with something inside him he had never been able to explain. He pressed deeper into the force, not with training, not with technique, but with instinct. And the ore opened. The chamber around him darkened. The flicker of his glow rod dimmed. The air vibrated with low tones that hummed behind his heartbeat. He saw a shape, not fully formed, a presence made of echoes and fragments. Not alive, not dead. A collection of grief. It was not a spirit. It was a field, an accumulation of everything the asteroid had witnessed, held together by the weight of the dark side. The presence didn't threaten him. It didn't demand anything. It simply reflected him. Every thought he'd buried, every truth he'd ignored, every curiosity he had never spoken out loud. He saw his future not in images, but in sensation. Cold corridors, silent rooms, a life built on balance where others would lose themselves. And something else, a feeling, a calm acceptance of what he would become. He opened his eyes. The chamber returned. The presence faded, but something had changed. The asteroid had not chosen him. It had recognized him. He stood there quietly, hand still pressed to the warm ore, and understood the truth he would never tell the guild. He was no longer studying the darkness. He was entering it. Not with fear, not with hunger, with clarity. And beneath the surface of thought, the dark side finally opened its first door. The dark side did not call to him. He looked for it. After his first communion with the asteroid, Vectivus returned to his duties unchanged on the surface, or so it appeared. He still attended guild meetings, still reviewed cargo logs, still walked past terrified workers with that same distant calm. But something had shifted. A new question had begun to form. Not, what is this power? But why does it exist? Most who encountered the dark side either fled it or surrendered to it. But Vectivus did neither. He studied it the way a physicist studies gravity or a chemist studies fire. His approach was not passionate. It was patient. He began by collecting restricted texts. Not holocrons, not yet, but fragments, archived reports from Jedi investigations, recovered Sith inscriptions from unknown systems, linguistic reconstructions of Dwartai glyphs etched on forbidden walls. He read them late at night, deep within the asteroid, surrounded by silence thick enough to press against the mind. They did not frighten him. They intrigued him. The Jedi spoke of temptation, of madness, of corruption. But what Vectivus saw in the language of the Sith was something else entirely. Control. Not over others, over perception. Over thought. Over self. The dark side, in its raw form, was chaos. But the writings revealed something more refined. A way to shape experience. to bend memory, to induce fear not with violence, but with presence. It was not evil. It was structure. He made a decision, not a vow, not a fall, a step. He would not chase power for its own sake. He would test it. He would hold it in his hand like a mineral sample and weigh its effects, not just on others, on himself. And in that choice, he did what few ever had. He turned toward the dark, without turning away from who he was. He remained the same man who sent letters to old friends, who reviewed station maintenance reports, who sat in the cafeteria alone, but always in the same seat. But at night, he reached deeper. He began practicing perception rituals, simple, meditative loops described in ancient Sith codices. Not to summon power, to sharpen thought. He used the dark not to cloud emotion, but to refine it. He once sat in complete stillness for 12 hours while a colleague screamed from a panic spiral brought on by the asteroid's resonance fields. He never flinched. He never offered help. But afterward, he sent the man home with paid leave and a falsified report that spared him reprimand. When asked why, Vectivus replied only, "He'll never come back here again." And that's what he needed. He was not cruel. He was calculating. He was not heartless. He was distant. He was not yet a Sith. But the philosophy had already found root in him. He believed that knowledge must not be limited by fear, and if the Force held darkness within it, then so did reality. He did not seek to dominate the dark side. He sought to understand how it fit. And in doing so, he did what no Sith before him had done. He began walking toward the dark, with both eyes open. The deeper he studied, the more the Force began to shift around him. Not in strength, in tone. It no longer flickered at the edge of his senses like a distant star. It moved like a current beneath his thoughts. Subtle, constant, unafraid. He found the codex sealed inside a derelict transport ship buried beneath collapsed rock, kilometers from the main station. No records marked its presence. No survivors. Only dust, silence, and one locked container lined with ancient symbols scorched into black durasteel. He opened it alone. Inside were fragments of a lost text, portions of a Sith treatise on illusion and memory, believed destroyed by the Jedi centuries ago. There was no title. Only a passage written in the margin, translated into crude, basic. What the mind accepts, the body obeys. What the heart believes, the soul becomes. Vectivus read it carefully. Not with awe, with analysis. The pages held techniques for shaping perception not through brute will, but by aligning emotional states with symbolic triggers. He recognized patterns from the asteroid's behavior. Illusions were not deceptions. They were directed truths. Stories implanted into space and mind, reinforced by fear, grief, and memory. The codex did not promise power. It offered reflection. And in it, Vectivus saw his own methods but written long before he was born. He didn't worship it. He didn't fear it. He studied it. Piece by piece, he began testing its principles. He recreated visual anomalies inside sealed chambers, induced false memories in himself, then removed them. He mapped emotional frequencies into audio tones that could trigger specific responses: calm, dread, shame. The results were consistent. The Force responded not just to thought, but to belief. And belief, once stabilized, could be replicated, weaponized, preserved. He called this emotive architecture the building of internal structures in the mind, supported by narrative, reinforced by truth. He wasn't inventing Sith alchemy. He was refining it. The Codex taught him that darkness didn't need to burn. It could whisper, and if used carefully, it could teach. He began writing his own annotations beside the ancient texts, correcting assumptions, posing new hypotheses. He treated it like a conversation between centuries. The dark side, as described by the Codex, was not a hunger. It was a mirror reflecting what the user brought into it. Those who entered with hatred found destruction. Those who entered with curiosity found understanding. It was the difference between obsession and clarity. Vectivus made no declarations, no oaths. He told no one what he had found. But each day his connection to the Force grew quieter, more stable, less reactive. He did not lose himself. He grew more himself. And in doing so, he understood something that most Sith had forgotten. The purpose of fear was not to rule. It was to reveal. Through the Codex, he began to build a new philosophy. One where illusion served not to mislead, but to expose what others could not admit. Not all lies are false. Some are mirrors, held up until the soul flinches. And Vectivus did not flinch. Most who fall to the dark side do so in moments that define them. A scream, a betrayal, a fire that burns through the last pieces of who they were. But Vectivus did not fall. He stepped, quietly, deliberately, without fear. There was no breaking point, no shattering of the self. Only a gradual turning, like a star shifting in its orbit, slow, patient, inevitable. He began each morning the same way. A cup of tea, a review of mining reports, and a silent walk through the lower tunnels. He passed workers who whispered about shadows. He noted the trembling hands of engineers. He observed without judgment. He understood them better now. Not because he shared their fear, but because he understood its shape. The Codex had changed him. Not in morality, in perspective. It taught that the dark side was not chaos. It was structure, a framework for understanding the places where light refused to look. And Vectivus, methodical as he was, had always looked there. He began practicing techniques described in the margins of the Codex. Breathing patterns that aligned emotion with memory. Meditations that focused the mind on truth instead of comfort. Exercises meant to stabilize identity before interacting with the dark. He did each one with precision. He felt his connection to the Force deepen. Not as a tidal wave, but as a slow tide pulling gently at the edges of his thoughts. His first deliberate use of the dark side happened without ceremony. He was alone in a resonance chamber, monitoring a fragment of ore that pulsed with residual anguish from a long-dead worker. He reached out not with anger, not with fear, but with intention. The Force responded. The ore brightened for an instant, then dimmed. He felt the memory inside it shift, rearranging itself into clarity. Not gone. Organized. The dark side had obeyed him. Not because he commanded it, but because he understood it. Most Sith would have taken this moment as a declaration of destiny. Vectivus simply wrote down the results. He did not crave more. He wanted accuracy. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and all the while, the asteroid pressed deeper into his mind, not corrupting it, shaping it. He began to sense emotions before they formed in others. He could predict when a worker would panic before the panic began. He knew when a lie was forming on someone's tongue. He knew when someone stood behind him by the shape of their guilt alone. This was not power. This was perception, refined through darkness. He kept his routines. He sent letters to family. He approved guild budgets. He attended meetings with a calm smile. But beneath that calm was something growing, something that did not scream or demand or burn. Insight. The dark side, he realized, was not about domination. It was about truth. Truth stripped of fear. Truth stripped of comfort. Truth stripped of illusion. A Sith who embraced hunger became a monster. A Sith who embraced pain became a weapon. But a Sith who embraced understanding became something far more dangerous. Someone who could choose. Vectivus was not being pulled toward darkness. He was walking toward it with open eyes, making every decision himself, step by measured step. And the Force, both calm and cold around him, recognized the shape of his descent. Not a fall, a lowering, a controlled dive into depths others could not survive. He was becoming Sith, not by losing who he was, but by becoming exactly who he was meant to be. The first rule most Sith learn is to let go. Of names, of attachments, of the life they lived before the darkness. Vectivus refused. He kept his name, kept his voice calm, kept his routines, his habits, his quiet smiles. To anyone on the station, he was still the same man. Precise, unshaken, private. But in private, he had already begun to shape something the Sith had forgotten. A life with darkness that did not erase identity, but clarified it. He still wrote letters to his family. He never threatened them, never lied to them, never vanished. He told them just enough that his research was expanding, that he needed more time away. They never questioned it. Because he had not changed in the ways they feared. But he had changed. He no longer feared his own memories. He could summon the worst moments of his life, the quiet humiliations, the childhood loneliness, the isolation he had once mistaken for peace, and view them with calm detachment. The dark side had not twisted him. It had illuminated him. He learned to walk through old regrets without pain, to speak to illusions in the tunnels without blinking, to hold sorrow in his hands and set it down without flinching. He once encountered a miner who had collapsed in one of the lower corridors. The man whispered about shadows chasing him, said he saw his father waiting in the dark, holding a tool smeared with blood. Vectivus didn't call for medical help. He knelt beside the man, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "He's not here for you. You brought him with you." The man stared, and then he wept. It was not kindness. It was truth. Vectivus helped him to his feet, walked him back to the surface, and sent him home, not to escape, to heal, because not all darkness must be punished. Some must be understood. He began building chambers not to test others, but to test himself. He placed himself in simulated illusions, built environments from memory, stepped into echoes of his own mind and let the Force reshape them. Each time he emerged more centered, more whole. He was becoming a Sith, but not like the ones in the archives. He did not hunger for titles. He did not seek destruction. He sought mastery of fear, of self, of the hidden architecture beneath suffering. Most Sith tore their past away to be reborn. Vectivus wore his past like armor. The Force did not punish him for it. It strengthened around him, silent, invisible, steady. In time, he knew he would be powerful. Not through violence, but through precision. He could already alter the emotional temperature of a room with his presence. He could speak a sentence and have it echo in a mind for days. He could read fear like a language and respond with exactly the word that would bend it. But through it all, he remained himself. Not because he resisted the darkness, because he understood it. And in that understanding, he found a truth most Sith would never accept. You don't have to become a monster to master one. There was no ceremony, no fire, no blade pressed to the sky. When he took the name Darth, it was in silence. He stood alone in the lowest chamber of the asteroid, surrounded by layers of stone that remembered more than most living beings ever would. No witnesses, no apprentices, no masters, just him and the Force. He had reached a threshold. His research had grown beyond observation. His understanding had passed beyond theory. The rituals he studied no longer felt ancient. They felt familiar. He could touch a wall and taste its grief. He could speak a word, and the air around him would slow. He could listen to echoes and predict their return before the sound was made. This was not mysticism. It was resonance. And in that moment, he realized something that had lingered beneath his work for years. He was no longer a man studying the dark side. He was part of it. He did not feel pride. He felt clarity. He chose the name Vectivus not to inspire fear, but to mark transformation. The word came from a now-dead dialect, a mining term used to describe a harmonic point where resonance peaked before collapse. A moment of perfect tension. Before the stone broke open, he found it fitting. He did not speak the name aloud. He breathed it. Once, and the chamber listened. Nothing changed outwardly. The asteroid didn't quake. The Force didn't roar. But something inside him settled, like a puzzle piece finding its place. He did not see visions. He did not hear voices. But he knew, without question, that he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. And that he had done it, with full awareness. Most Sith arrive at their name through suffering, through death, through rituals soaked in blood. But Vectivus was different. His transformation was not built on pain. It was built on alignment. He had not killed to become Sith. He had understood. And in that understanding, he had become. He still kept his routines. Still responded to guild transmissions. Still maintained the illusion of a quiet researcher working on fringe energy anomalies. But his true work had begun. He spent his nights in chambers even the Force hesitated to touch. He meditated in spaces that had once broken lesser minds. And he wrote not for others, but for himself. Notebooks filled with calculations, ritual schema, philosophical treatises. He annotated the Sith code in the margins of engineering blueprints. He rewrote known rituals with alternative harmonic pathways. He corrected ancient assumptions about emotional thresholds. He wasn't trying to change the Sith. He was simply being honest about what worked. The title of Darth didn't empower him. It reminded him to be precise, to choose, to calculate, to observe. He wasn't consumed by darkness. He partnered with it. And in doing so, he became something rare. A Sith who did not lose himself to become what he was meant to be. His name did not echo across battlefields. It did not scar planets. It was never spoken in fear by armies, but in the hollow places of the Force, where silence gathered and memories whispered in stone. The name Darth Vectivus carried weight, because it was never shouted, only whispered. By the dark itself. Power was never the goal. Understanding was. He did not build a fortress. He built a lab. Deep within the asteroid's core past the echo chambers, below the failed tunnels, Vectivus designed a sanctum not for war, but for study. Its doors opened only for him. Its systems required no droids. Its corridors responded to his presence, adjusting temperature, pressure, and vibration fields in real time. Each chamber served a purpose. One focused on illusion, another on memory recall, a third on harmonics, tuning the resonance of the Force itself through ore-filtered amplification nodes. The place did not radiate fear. It hummed with calm. There were no torture racks, no screaming captives, no red-lit altars soaked in blood, just silence and layers of observation. Vectivus approached every phenomenon as a scientist first. He charted emotional fields like weather patterns. He used oscillators to mimic the cadence of grief. He created artificial hauntings not to scare, but to test response. His work was not cruel, but it was exacting. He learned that when fear is introduced at a precise frequency, the body responds before the mind registers it. He found that sorrow echoes differently in shared spaces than in solitude. He proved that guilt, when amplified by the Force, could be used to bypass conscious resistance, allowing suggestions to take root without command. He did not use this knowledge to manipulate. He used it to map the soul. In time, he discovered how to bind fragments of memory into residual constructs, illusions that could survive on their own, looping endlessly, anchored to the Force through emotional pressure. They looked like ghosts. But they weren't. They were engineered, perfect simulations of trauma, calibrated to reinforce a location's energetic signature. He called them resonant reflections. They could not think, could not change, but they could teach. And in teaching them, he learned more. Not about the Force, about people, what they feared, what they refused to admit, what they became when no one was watching. He once programmed a chamber to replay a moment of indecision, a memory of someone failing to speak a needed truth. Volunteers sent into the chamber often emerged shaking. Some wept. One walked away and never returned. Vectivus did not judge them. He recorded the results. He believed fear was not weakness. It was data. Every scream had a pattern. Every silence had a shape. Every decision, no matter how irrational, followed an internal rhythm. And through the dark side, he could listen to that rhythm like music. His laboratory became a symphony of shadow and memory. He didn't call it a temple. Didn't pretend it was sacred. It was just a place to learn what no one else dared ask. There were no guards, no defenses, because no one came. The asteroid was known by then. Its effects whispered across guild networks, spread by rumor and loss. People stopped requesting assignments. The region was marked unstable. Vectivus was left alone, just as he wanted. And in that quiet, he shaped a legacy not through violence, but through knowledge. The laboratory did not store weapons. It stored patterns. It held no armies, only answers. And beneath its floor, where the force ran deepest and reality bent like glass, he found the one thing all Sith sought, a place where truth did not hide. Darkness, he learned, was not chaos. It was structure. It only looked wild to those who entered it with shaking hands and broken hearts. To Vectivus, the dark side behaved like any natural force, consistent, predictable, shaped by rules older than galaxies. He began charting the patterns, not of light and shadow, but of emotion. He discovered that every feeling had a shape in the force. Fear contracted. Grief spiraled. Shame bent downward like a collapsing star. Anger pulsed in straight lines, sharp and narrow. But regret moved like water. It seeped into everything. He documented it all, filling data slates with sketches that looked more like star maps than emotional graphs. Visitors, the rare few who braved the asteroid, called them distortions. He called them truths. His laboratory became a place where the force behaved like a living equation. He could predict when a haunting would occur based on the emotional weight lingering in a corridor. He could anticipate which worker would suffer visions by analyzing their voice frequency, the tightness in their breath, the hesitation in their footsteps. Patterns. Always patterns. He found that memories did not vanish into the force. They left imprints, layers, as if the universe kept copies of moments too heavy to dissolve. The darkest memories resonated strongest, not because darkness was powerful, but because pain carried weight. And in that weight, he found answers the Jedi never sought. One night, deep in the resonance chamber, he conducted an experiment that changed everything. He isolated a pocket of ore saturated with decades of stored grief. The readings were unstable, nearly volatile. Instead of retreating, he reached out with the force. Not to dominate, not to cleanse, to listen. The ore responded with a pulse that shook dust from the ceiling. For a moment, the chamber flickered, light bending, sound stretching, time folding in on itself. Vectivus saw not one memory, but many. 1,000 griefs, overlaying one another in a simultaneous echo. Different voices, different years, different tragedies, yet the pattern was identical. Emotion decayed in the same rhythm, regardless of the person. Fear weakened at predictable intervals. Sorrow returned in cycles. Hope, when present, created distortions in the decay, slowing it, twisting it, reshaping its form. It was beautiful, terrible, precise. He realized then that the force didn't simply react to emotion. It recorded it. And if the force remembered everything, then the difference between a haunting and a legacy was only the strength of the memory left behind. This was the secret the Sith had always misunderstood. Power wasn't taken. It was accumulated moment by moment, layer by layer, memory by memory, until the weight of one's presence reshaped reality. Vectivus understood this instinctively. He began experimenting with creating his own patterns. Small, at first, nudging impressions into the walls, embedding faint emotional signatures that only the most sensitive instruments could detect. Then larger, altering the shape of a room's atmosphere with a single controlled emotion, molding feelings like clay. He did not corrupt the chambers, He tuned them. His presence became an anchor. His thoughts left ripples. His calm created spaces where fear behaved differently, softened at the edges, bent around him like light through glass. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly wield the dark side. Not to destroy reality, but to rewrite its rules. Not with rage, with precision, not with hunger, with understanding. Patterns surrounded him, and he had learned how to shape them. The galaxy believed that all Sith were the same. That darkness always demanded suffering. That power could only grow when fed with cruelty. Vectivus proved them wrong. He did not rule anyone. He did not command armies. He did not torture, threaten, or dominate. And yet, the dark side gathered around him more thickly with each passing day. Not because he forced it to, because he matched it. He learned early that cruelty was a distraction, loud, wasteful, imprecise. Fear could be used without inflicting pain. Control could be achieved without raising a hand. The most powerful illusions required no victims, only understanding. He began constructing chambers that reshaped emotion through resonance alone. A person could walk inside and feel their anger soften, their shame sharpen, their sorrow echo forward, as though reflected through a long tunnel. He didn't manipulate them. He allowed them to confront what they already carried. Darkness, he realized, didn't need victims. It needed honesty. The more he refined his methods, the more the Force seemed to respect his restraint. Not as virtue, the dark side had no interest in morality, but as clarity. His self-control made him sharp, unclouded, capable of directing power with precision most Sith could only dream of. He once stood in a chamber where the walls reflected decades of anguish. Any other Sith would have drawn strength from that pain, using it as fuel, letting it burn through their veins. Vectivus simply observed. He let the sorrow wash over him without swallowing him. He felt the memories without claiming them. And when he reached out with the Force, the chamber responded like a steady heartbeat. Not violent, not ravenous, balanced. His presence altered the room, calming storms of emotion that had raged for years. The illusions softened. The echoes slowed. The darkness did not fade. It listened, because he did not fight it. There were workers who came to him in secret, broken by the asteroid's effects, terrified of the visions that haunted their sleep. He never revealed what he truly was. He never spoke the word Sith. He simply guided them. He taught one man to breathe through the echo of his lost son's voice. He taught a woman to recognize when the visions weren't hers. He taught a young technician to separate memory from fear. He didn't heal them. He gave them tools. And each time, as they walked away shaken but whole, he felt the dark side shift around him, not with approval, but with acknowledgement, because he was using it, without surrendering to it. A rarity, a contradiction, a warning. His notebooks filled with theories about moral neutrality within the dark side, notes that would have enraged most Sith Lords. But Vectivus didn't care. He had no desire to spread his teachings. No need for followers or disciples. Power meant nothing to him unless it could be understood. There was only one person he feared it might harm: himself. So he watched carefully, monitored his thoughts, tracked every subtle change inside his own mind. Not to resist corruption, to study it. If he ever found a moment where the dark side pushed him toward cruelty, toward conquest, toward ego. He would step back. And yet, that moment never came. Because the dark side did not own him. It partnered with him. A quiet pact, signed not with blood, but with discipline. And so, in the deepest chamber of the asteroid, a place shaped by grief, silence, and memory, Darth Vectivus became something almost unthinkable. A Sith Lord, without cruelty, without hunger, without hate. Powerful not because he broke others, but because he never broke himself. He never sent invitations. But people came. Old friends, former colleagues, even distant family. The asteroid was infamous by then, its location buried in mining logs, unlisted on navigational charts. But those who knew him still found their way. Some arrived out of concern, some out of curiosity. A few came simply because they missed him. They expected silence. They expected distance. They did not expect to be welcomed. Vectivus greeted each of them the same way, calm, measured, polite. He offered food, offered rest. Then, when they were ready, he offered a walk. The halls of the asteroid had changed since they last saw him. No longer just stone and metal, they now hummed with something softer. A quiet tension. Not threatening, not cold, aware. Vectivus led them through chambers he had calibrated carefully, not to deceive, but to reveal. One room altered its temperature based on the emotions of its occupant. Another dimmed its lights when a lie was spoken. Some guests noticed. Most didn't. He never pointed it out. He simply observed. There was no cruelty in what he did. No trap. No manipulation. But the asteroid had become a mirror. One woman, an old friend from his academy years, stepped into a chamber and froze. She whispered a name Vectivus didn't recognize. She said it again, then sat down and wept. Later, she told him she hadn't spoken that name in decades. He didn't ask who it was. She didn't explain. But before she left, she thanked him. Not for the hospitality, for the silence. Another guest, a former partner in a business he once walked away from, arrived with suspicion in his voice. He accused Vectivus of hiding, of becoming something else. Vectivus didn't argue. He led him down the central corridor, a place where emotional resonance was strongest. At the center of the path, the man stopped, looked behind him, then whispered, "You never told me she died." Vectivus didn't respond, because he didn't know who the man was talking about. The guest left without saying goodbye. Not angry, not afraid, just quiet. These weren't tricks. They weren't Sith mind games. They were conditions, reflections. Each visitor brought something buried. The asteroid, guided by Vectivus's calibration, brought it to the surface. The Force didn't scream in these chambers. It whispered, and those who listened too closely often heard themselves. Vectivus learned from each encounter. Not about power, about truth. People carried more than they admitted. Pain, grief, unspoken shame. And when surrounded by silence, true silence, that weight rose like vapor. He didn't judge them. He didn't interfere. He allowed the resonance to do what it was meant to do. Not harm. Clarify. He once told a guest, "This place doesn't show you what you fear. It shows you what you forgot to fear." Some left shaken. some left lighter, none left unchanged. And though he never asked them to return, a few did. Vectivus never claimed to be a healer. He never claimed to be a Sith in their presence. But they knew. They saw it in the way he moved, in the stillness behind his eyes. He was something else now. Not a monster, not a savior. Something quieter, something watching, something that no longer needed to explain itself. Because the asteroid spoke for him, and it always told the truth, even when no one was ready to hear it. He never told them what the chambers would do. He simply opened the doors. Some guests entered confidently. Others hesitated. But none understood what waited for them. Until the moment they stepped inside. These were not tests. Not punishments. Vectivus designed each room to mirror one thing. Truth. Not objective truth. Personal truth. The kind that lingers under memory like dust on untouched shelves. One corridor whispered names. Not always loudly. Not always accurately. But enough. A father heard the voice of a son he hadn't seen in years. A colleague heard an apology he never gave. One woman said she heard herself younger, scared, asking to be forgiven. None of these sounds came from speakers. There were no records. Only patterns. The Force, when pressed into certain frequencies, could hold memory. And memory, when shaped carefully, could echo back through the air. Vectivus didn't control what the chambers said. He let the resonance choose. One room played back moments. Not as holograms, not as illusions, but as feelings. You would walk into a space and suddenly feel what you once felt, before you admitted it was there. A man once fell to his knees after one step inside. He said it felt like shame. Pure, unfiltered regret. So strong he could barely breathe. Vectivus offered him a seat, waited silently, and when the man finally looked up, his hands were shaking. "I thought I'd buried that," he whispered. Vectivus said, "You did, but the ground remembers." Some illusions were visible. Not grand, not theatrical. Just real enough to catch the corner of a guest's eye. One visitor claimed she saw her mother in the hallway mirror. Not young, not old. Exactly as she remembered her the day she died. When she turned, the reflection stayed behind. And smiled. Vectivus didn't explain it. He didn't know if it was the chamber. Or the Force. Some things he had stopped trying to categorize. Because the deeper he went into resonance work, the more he realized something unnerving. Some reflections spoke back. They changed. They adapted. They waited. One guest asked if he was haunted. Vectivus paused, then said, "Only by things that haven't happened yet." The illusions weren't memories alone. Some behaved like questions. Some responded to body language, or tone, or breath. He once whispered a name into the silence, not expecting a reply. The wall beside him darkened, and for a second, he swore he heard it, whispered back. Not as echo, as answer. That was the line he never crossed. Assuming it was all his design. Because the asteroid remembered too much. And memory, when fed enough grief, starts to resemble intention. He tested the boundaries carefully. Watched how long illusions lasted. Watched when they faded. Some didn't. One reflection, an old man no visitor recognized, began appearing in multiple chambers. He never spoke, never moved. But he was always watching. Vectivus documented the pattern, but never tried to remove it. Because part of him wondered if the asteroid had begun dreaming on its own. And if that were true, it wasn't just reflecting people anymore. It was becoming one. There were illusions he created, and there were illusions he found. Vectivus always knew the difference. His own constructs behaved predictably. They followed equations. They dissolved when resonance dropped. They shifted according to emotional input. But then came the others. Shadows that did not match the walls. Footsteps that continued after the guest had stopped walking. Figures that appeared where there were no projectors, no ore pockets, no harmonic triggers. They behaved like memories, with minds. It began with a technician who stayed overnight in the western chambers. He reported seeing a woman standing at the far end of the corridor. Silent, blurred, faint. Vectivus assumed it was one of his lingering reflections. The technician described the woman's clothing, her voice, her posture. Vectivus checked his logs, cross-referenced energy patterns. Nothing matched. The reflection wasn't one of his. 2 days later, another guest described the same woman. Same clothing, same posture, but standing in an entirely different corridor. Vectivus watched the security recordings. There was nothing. No figure. No distortion. Only sound of faint hum, rhythmic, almost like breathing. The asteroid had produced illusions before. Echoes of memories. Fragments of past minds caught in the stone. But this felt different. The woman appeared when no one was afraid. She appeared when the resonance was low. She appeared when no emotional trigger had been activated. She appeared by choice. Vectivus did not approach these anomalies with fear. He approached them with certainty. The dark side did not invent from nothing. It revealed from something. He began studying these uninvited illusions, tracking their movements, predicting their appearance. They followed no pattern he recognized. They drifted through rooms he had sealed. Sometimes they faded before a guest noticed. Other times they lingered long enough for guests to ask, "Who was that?" Vectivus never answered. Another anomaly appeared in his private chamber, a shadow shaped like a crouched figure. It remained for hours, unmoving, unaffected by the shift in air temperature, unbroken by Vectivus's presence. He attempted to disrupt it with controlled resonance. The shadow reacted, but not by fading. It turned, just slightly. As if listening, Vectivus felt a ripple in the force, not of danger, not of warning, but of recognition, as though something inside the asteroid had begun to see him, as clearly as he saw it. He reached toward the shadow with the force. Not aggressively, curiously. The shadow flickered, expanded, then collapsed inward like breath returning to lungs. When it vanished, the chamber felt heavier. Not darker, heavier. Like memory settling. Vectivus wrote in his notes, "Illusion is no longer the correct term. These are remnants with intent." He was careful never to call them spirits. They were not alive, not dead, not aware in the way beings are aware. But they reacted, responded, adjusted, as though the weight of accumulated sorrow had learned to move. Vectivus tested this theory. He created controlled illusions in the presence of these remnants. Simple ones, shapes, silhouettes, echoes. The remnants responded. They bent toward his constructs, merged with them, strengthened them. They behaved almost like the asteroid's own version of the Force, a localized field shaped by history rather than will. His realization came slowly, quietly, in the dim glow of a resonance monitor. Some illusions were illusions, but others were true. Not real in the physical sense, real in the emotional sense, real in the Force. Memories so strong, so heavy, so unwilling to dissolve, that they had begun to walk. Vectivus did not destroy them. He did not fear them. He watched. He learned. Because the moment illusions become true, they stop being reflections. They become warnings. There is a point in every seeker's path when understanding becomes danger, not because the truth is violent, but because it is endless. Vectivus reached that point without ceremony. No alarms, no visions, just the quiet realization that the asteroid had begun studying him, as carefully as he studied it. The remnants behaved differently when he entered a room. They tightened, drawing closer, as if testing the edges of his awareness. His presence changed the resonance fields. Some echoes sharpened, some softened, some shifted into patterns that did not match any memory he had recorded. It was as if the asteroid had stopped replaying the past and had begun asking questions. One night, he walked the central corridor alone. He sensed nothing unusual at first, only the steady hum of energy, the familiar stillness of the air. Then the lights dimmed, not abruptly, not maliciously, as though the chamber were holding its breath. He felt a tug in the Force, not a command, not a threat, an invitation. He followed it deeper, descending into a chamber that had once been a storage vault. Now it was empty, but not vacant. The air felt thick, as if carrying the residue of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. He stood still, waited. Slowly, images formed at the edge of vision. Not illusions, not echoes, possibilities. He saw himself, older, thinner, standing beside an apprentice he had not yet taken. He saw visitors walking through his halls years after his death. He saw the asteroid silent again, its memories buried, its resonance fading. The visions didn't claim to be true. They didn't try to convince him. They simply existed as questions. The Force around him pulsed gently like a teacher waiting to see what answer a student would choose. Vectivus understood then that he had crossed a threshold. He no longer stood outside the dark side, observing it. He stood within its flow, part of its structure, and the darkness was responding to him. He had always believed knowledge was neutral. That intention shaped outcome. That restraint protected the mind. But some truths carried weight even he hadn't prepared for. The asteroid's deepest memories, the ones untouched for generations, began surfacing without his prompting. Faces he had never seen. Voices that belonged to centuries-old tragedies. Moments of panic, betrayal, and surrender. Too many. Too fast. He staggered for the first time in years. Not from fear, from volume. The Force pressed against him like a flood trying to fit through a narrow door. He steadied his breath, anchoring himself, letting the memories wash through him without taking root. When the onslaught faded, the chamber grew still again. But something had changed. The darkness had shown him its limits. Or perhaps his own. He realized then that the power he studied was not infinite. It was layered. Each layer carried a price. Not of morality, but of understanding. The more truth he uncovered, the heavier it became. And some truths, once seen, could never be unlearned. He left the chamber, knowing he had reached the point where knowledge and danger met. A line few Sith recognized. Even fewer survived. He had learned enough to continue. But he had also learned enough to know this. If he stepped any deeper without care, the darkness would not need to corrupt him. It would simply overwhelm him. And so, for the first time since taking the name Darth Vectivus, he paused. Not in fear, in respect. Because beyond this threshold lay a version of himself he was not yet ready to meet. He never planned to take an apprentice. He believed the rule of two was not wrong, only misunderstood. Power passed in silence, not in blood. Legacy was not a chain. It was a mirror. But the Force had other ideas. She came to him not as a supplicant, not as a warrior, but as a question. She was young, not in years, but in spirit. Bright-eyed, precise, unafraid to ask what others only thought. He noticed her mind first. The way she looked at silence like a tool to be sharpened. The way she spoke of the dark side, not with awe, but with calculation. She had trained elsewhere, under someone who had burned too hot and vanished too fast. She had seen what rage could do. And she wanted something else. When she asked to stay, he said nothing. When she asked to learn, he still said nothing. Only after 3 days of watching her wander the outer chambers, taking notes in solitude, did he finally speak. "You remember too much," he said. She looked at him and replied, "That's why I came." It was the only answer he needed. He did not test her. He didn't break her down. He didn't ask her to forget. He asked her to listen. And she did. She sat beside him as he tuned the resonance fields. She observed as he mapped grief with sound. She walked behind him through corridors where illusions whispered, and never once flinched. She remembered the names of every guest who had left his halls. She remembered their expressions, their silences, their exits. And in that memory, she built her strength. He did not give her a Sith name. He told her to choose her own when she understood who she was. He didn't push her into rituals. He led her to their edges, then stepped back. She studied the codexes, but not for power, for design. She rewrote one entirely, not to change its meaning, but to simplify its form. When he read it, he nodded. She was learning. But beneath that learning was something else. A fracture he hadn't seen at first. She never spoke of her past. But she never severed it either. Vectivus saw the signs. In her posture. In her silence when certain chambers pulsed too loudly. In her eyes when the shadows repeated names she hadn't shared. She did not fear the dark side. She feared what it might show her if she let go. And so she held on. To memories. To faces. To questions she would not ask. At first, he thought it was strength. Now, he began to wonder. There was power in remembrance. But power misaligned becomes pressure. He started noticing her hesitation. Not in combat. Not in study. In stillness, when the force grew quiet, when the asteroid spoke too clearly, she blinked. She pulled back. Not visibly, not audibly, but enough. He did not stop her. He did not correct her, because her journey was hers. But in the way she stood, always a step too straight, a breath too shallow, he saw a student who could not yet fall forward, because she was too afraid to be caught. She was not broken. She remembered. And sometimes, memory is the most fragile thing of all. He trained her with no lightsaber, no commands, no punishments, only observation. She expected challenges. He offered questions. Why did the echo hesitate in the corridor? What changed when you entered the room? What did you feel before the vision appeared? She learned faster than he had. Not because she was stronger, but because she had context. She knew what loss felt like. She knew what guilt tasted like when buried. And when the Force echoed those emotions through the asteroid, she didn't recoil. She recognized them. Vectivus did not ask her to destroy her empathy. He refined it. He taught her how to trace grief in silence, how to isolate emotional fields with a glance, how to manipulate the edges of memory, without ever telling a lie. He showed her the Sith texts, but never dictated what they meant. He let her translate them on her own. Sometimes she rewrote them. Sometimes she disagreed. He encouraged it. She learned to resonate with the Force through breath, not dominance. She learned to construct illusions with clarity, not rage. He gave her the task of designing her own chamber, a place to study pain without causing it. She spent weeks building it, refining its acoustics, calibrating the aura fields so that emotion would emerge only under strict conditions. When it was finished, she led him inside. He stood silently, and after 1 minute, he felt a sorrow that was not his settle over him like fog. He nodded. She understood. Her techniques were sharp, precise, her instincts careful. Too careful. That was the only sign. She never reached too far. Never tested the edge of herself. Always held something back. He asked her once, "What are you most afraid of losing?" She said, "I don't want to become someone I don't recognize." He paused, then said, "Then become someone you do." She smiled, but did not answer. Their lessons continued. They studied emotional mimicry, how fear could be shaped to match another's breath. They practiced mirror illusions, crafting environments that adapted to thought. She even began refining his older techniques, discovering shortcuts in his harmonic structures that made the resonance more efficient. He was proud. But pride is dangerous in silence. He never spoke it aloud, and she never asked. There was still a distance between them, not of trust, but of tension. She never tested his patience, never questioned his authority. She revered him more than he wanted, and in that reverence, he sensed a flaw. She followed him with precision, because she feared failing him. Not openly, not loudly, quietly. She once stayed awake 3 nights, recalibrating a failed experiment, even though he told her it could wait. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. When he found her, she was sitting in the center of the chamber, staring at a resonance pattern that had looped over itself. He asked her what she saw. She said, "I don't know why it won't stop echoing." He said nothing, Because the pattern was hers, and no lesson could reach someone who was already teaching themselves how to be afraid. Strength is easy to see. Fractures are not. Vectivus had trained many minds in his life, miners, researchers, colleagues, visitors trembling under the weight of their own memories. He knew what broken people looked like. His apprentice was not one of them. She was disciplined, precise, patient, but strength becomes fragile when built around fear. And her fear was simple: failure. Not failure in the Force, not failure in her training, failure in his eyes. It began small. Moments where she hesitated a fraction of a second too long. Moments where her breath tightened when he entered a room. Moments where her answers became exactly what she thought he wanted, not what she believed. She learned every technique he showed her, but she learned them like a child holding glass too tightly. One night, while practicing controlled illusions, she crafted a memory that did not belong to either of them. A scene of a quiet home, a warm room, someone laughing just out of sight. Vectivus stepped into the chamber, studying the edges of the illusion. It was flawless. Too flawless. "Whose memory is this?" he asked. She froze. "It's no one's," she whispered. "It's what I think it should feel like." He understood then. She wasn't afraid of darkness. She was afraid of emptiness. She feared that without perfection, without control, her past would catch her again. That fear began shaping her power in ways she did not see. Her illusions became sharper, more vivid, more emotionally charged. Not dangerous, not yet, but unbalanced. Resonance reacts to emotion, and her emotions were beginning to bleed into her work. In one chamber, she created a field so dense with unshed grief that the air thickened like mist. Vectivus stepped inside and immediately sensed the flaw. It wasn't the chamber's grief. It was hers. She apologized before he said anything. He didn't need to reprimand her. He only asked, "What are you holding on to?" She answered, "If I let go of my past, I won't know who I am." He replied, "Then shape it, don't carry it." But advice means little to someone who has begun to measure their worth in silence. Her fracture widened in the places no one sees. In stillness, in reflection, in the moments between breaths where doubt grows like a shadow under a door. She grew stronger in the Force, more capable in her illusions, more adept at deciphering resonance. But she grew quieter too. Too quiet. Her journals became shorter, her questions less frequent, her laughter rare as it was vanished entirely. Vectivus watched her the way he watched unstable ore veins. Carefully, without interference, knowing one wrong touch could make everything collapse. He saw the signs. She pushed herself harder than necessary. She returned to chambers he told her to avoid. She stayed awake long after her strength should have faded. She was not trying to surpass him. She was trying to be enough. And that is the most dangerous path of all. Because the dark side does not corrupt with promises. It corrupts with pressure. It tells you to hold on. Just a little tighter. A little longer. Until your hands begin to tremble. One evening, he found her in the echo chamber, staring into a reflection that wasn't hers. A silhouette shaped by fear, leaning close as if whispering a secret. She didn't turn when he entered. She only said, "It keeps showing me what I'm afraid to lose." Vectivus replied softly. Then it's time you stop being afraid of losing it. But her voice, when she finally spoke, betrayed the truth he had already sensed. I'm not afraid of losing something, she whispered. I'm afraid of losing you. And in that moment, Vectivus understood the one fracture he had never prepared her for. Fear shaped by love is still fear. And fear always demands a price. The asteroid had seen many shadows. Some walked, some whispered, some remained etched into the walls, unmoving. But this shadow was different. It stood between two people, and neither wanted it to be there. She tried to hide it, the fear, the hesitation, the need to prove herself. But illusions could not lie to the one who had taught her how to build them. Vectivus knew. He saw it in the timing of her answers, in the stiffness of her shoulders when he gave feedback, in the subtle shift of her breathing when he entered the room. She was no longer training. She was measuring herself, and she always came up short. He tried to pull her back. Not with words, with space. He stopped assigning her tasks, stopped correcting her resonance patterns, stopped visiting her chambers without invitation. He wanted her to feel autonomy, to step out of his shadow. But all she felt was silence. And silence, when shaped by fear, begins to sound like judgment. She pushed harder. Her experiments became more ambitious. She constructed full memory loops, illusions that not only replayed moments but responded to input. Vectivus watched them unfold. They were brilliant, perfect, and hollow. Each one echoed with something she refused to say out loud. Not pain, expectation. She wanted his approval, and would not rest until she earned it. But he had never asked her to. He finally spoke to her in the meditation chamber, where the force was calmest. You are not failing, he said softly. She looked at him, eyes sharp, tired. Then why haven't you said anything? He paused. Because you're building from fear, not from strength. Her voice barely rose, but the words trembled. I thought fear was part of the path. It is, he answered. But not the destination. That was the line she could not cross. Not because she lacked the strength, but because she no longer knew who she would be, without the fear holding her together. Their conversations grew shorter, their silence longer. She still followed his lessons, still observed, still obeyed. But something in her gaze had shifted. It was not anger, not resentment. It was distance. She had begun to retreat, not from him, but from herself. She wanted to believe in what he taught, but part of her still believed that if she failed, everything she remembered would vanish. That, without his approval, she would disappear. It was never spoken aloud, but Vectivus felt it in every step she took toward mastery. Without peace, one day she stood beside him in the chamber of echoes. They listened together to the voices that weren't real, to the memories that weren't theirs. She asked him, "What happens if I can't fix the flaw?" He didn't ask which flaw she meant. He only replied, "Then let it be seen." She didn't respond. She walked away, and something shifted in the chamber. The resonance changed. Not drastically, just enough. Just a note out of key. The dark side felt it too. Vectivus knew then. The moment had arrived. The bond between them had not broken, but it had changed. Trust had been replaced by need. A need, no matter how quiet, always bends the force. They still worked together, still trained. But there was a shadow now, not of betrayal, not yet, a divergence, a quiet split in intention, a difference in how they viewed the same truth. He sought balance through understanding. She sought certainty through approval. And between those two paths, a line was drawn. Thin, silent, inevitable. She would cross it in time. And when she did, he would not stop her. Because Vectivus knew something his apprentice had not yet learned. Not all darkness begins with hate. Some begins with love that is afraid to let go. He did not reject the rule of two. He reinterpreted it. To most Sith, the rule was absolute. A master to embody power. An apprentice to crave it. When the time came, one would destroy the other. And the cycle would continue. Endless. Brutal. Pure. But Darth Vectivus saw something else hidden in the bones of that law. Not tradition. Not loyalty. A warning. He believed the rule of two was not designed to protect the Sith from weakness. It was designed to protect the Sith from themselves. Unchecked power breeds noise. Noise breeds collapse. And collapse had nearly ended the Sith. More than once. To Vectivus, the rule was never about betrayal. It was about structure. One master. One student. Not because ambition required it, but because clarity demanded it. And clarity was rare in the dark side. He taught this to his apprentice, not with threats, but with silence. He showed her that the rule, at its core, was balance. Without it, power grows wild. With it, power grows precise. He did not believe in tradition for its own sake. He had no reverence for dogma. But he understood design. And the rule of two was a design, meant to force reflection. Through fear, he simply removed the fear. What remained was discipline. He did not tell his apprentice to prepare for his death. He told her to prepare for her moment. To reach a point where she no longer needed his presence to walk through the dark. Not to destroy him. To succeed him. She asked once, "What if I never reach that point?" He replied, "Then the rule breaks with me." She thought it was a riddle. It wasn't. He was prepared for that outcome. Not out of pride. Out of principle. Because Vectivus believed legacy was not guaranteed. It had to be earned. And not by power alone. By clarity. By control. By understanding the darkness deeply enough to choose what not to use. He did not leave scrolls hidden in tombs. He left data, designs, documents crafted with the same care as his illusions. Everything had a reason. Every note he took, every diagram he sketched, every word he left behind, not just for his apprentice, for anyone who might follow. Because if the rule of two required death, then his death would not be wasted. It would become a map. The Sith would call that weakness. They would call it heresy. He called it preparation. And that was the difference. While others clung to the rule as religion, Vectivus used it as framework. He told no one. He asked no counsel. He made no declaration. He simply lived it differently. One master. One apprentice. One purpose. To understand, not to win, not to survive. To understand, because only in understanding could power be more than a cycle of hunger. Only in understanding could the dark side become a tool instead of a trap. He did not fear being replaced. He feared being misunderstood. And so, in every choice he made, from the apprentice he trained, to the chambers he designed, to the rule he followed quietly but not blindly, Darth Vectivus wrote a version of the rule of 2 sems. Few would recognize, but those who did would never forget it, because it left no scars, only echoes. He did not build holocrons for power. He built them for memory. The Sith had long used holocrons as vaults, containers for secrets, rituals, paths to strength. They were often locked with riddles, triggered by rage, or sealed with blood. Vectivus designed his differently. They opened with calm. Each one was small, unassuming, cased in black and silver, shaped to look like simple data units. No ornate carvings, no Sith glyphs, no illusions of grandeur. They were not meant to impress. They were meant to inform. Inside the first, he recorded his early research. Raw data on resonance, emotion-based echo fields. His first observations of memory fractures in ore veins. He explained not just what he discovered, but how he failed. His voice was steady in the recordings, measured, never preaching. "I am not a prophet," he said once. "I am a student with time." Each holocron added layers, not just of knowledge, but of context. He logged the first time his illusions spoke without design. He catalogued his apprentice's resonance experiments. He even recorded doubts, questions he wasn't ready to answer. One entry simply read, "The Force responds to clarity, so why does it amplify fear more quickly than peace?" He never answered it. He left it there, waiting. The Sith who found his holocrons generations later didn't understand. They called them fabrications, weakness, false teachings planted to mislead. Because Vectivus did not speak like a Sith. He never used words like domination, never demanded loyalty, never celebrated cruelty. Instead, he documented. When his apprentice built her own chamber, he recorded her process. When she failed to maintain emotional stability during a memory loop, he detailed why. He preserved moments of vulnerability, because he believed that was where the truth lived. Some of the holocrons didn't teach anything. They asked questions. What memory shaped you most? What fear do you carry in silence? What would you do with power if no one could see you use it? There were Sith Lords who tried to erase these artifacts, calling them dangerous, misleading, heretical. But others kept them, quietly, privately, because even those who killed without hesitation sometimes wondered what it all meant. And Vectivus had left answers, not comforting ones, not easy ones, real ones. He included diagrams for resonance chambers, harmonic patterns for illusion stability, emotional frequency tables, how guilt warped memory, how grief altered the passage of time within echo fields. He explained how the dark side amplified what you buried, and warned against letting it turn insight into obsession. One holocron contained nothing but silence. 30 seconds of it. Then, his voice, low and still. "If you've reached this one, you've already felt it. The dark side is not your enemy. It's your reflection. And if you can't accept what you see, you won't survive it. That holocron became legend. Some believed it cursed. Others called it a test. But for those who listened without fear, it became something else entirely. A mirror, held gently. Vectivus didn't leave behind weapons. He left reminders, not to be strong, but to be exact, not to conquer, but to understand the cost, because he knew one day someone would find these recordings and ask the same question he once had. Can power exist without cruelty? And if they were ready, his voice would be waiting, not to answer, to guide. They called it a ledger, but it was never about numbers. Vectivus's journals were precise, yes, dated, indexed, annotated, but beneath the structure was something deeper, a record of restraint, a diary of choices that few Sith would ever understand. He wrote not to explain himself to others, but to remain honest with himself. He detailed the day he first sensed his apprentice's fracture, not with blame, but with sorrow. I may have taught her too carefully, he wrote. I gave her control, but perhaps not enough forgiveness. Other entries were colder. Lines of data, failed experiments, illusions that became too real, chambers that grew unstable from prolonged exposure to grief. But even in those notes, there was no hunger, only accountability. He logged every time he used the dark side to influence emotion. He cross-referenced it with the subject's state of mind. He tracked how long the effect lingered. And in the margins, he always asked himself the same question. Was it necessary? This was what made the Sith uncomfortable. Not his knowledge, his mercy. He showed restraint in places they believed required force. He offered clarity where they demanded obedience. And still, the power around him grew. Some accused him of lying, of rewriting his journals to appear gentle, of covering up the darker truths. But the truth was far more dangerous. He had never needed to lie, because he had never surrendered to cruelty. And that, to the Sith, who believed in domination above all else, was the greatest heresy of all. Yet, buried within those journals, were a few true lies. Deliberate, carefully placed, written not to deceive, but to protect. He altered the coordinates to certain resonance chambers. He misidentified the ore composition of a memory loop structure. He embedded false formulas for emotional frequency amplification. Not to hide knowledge, to prevent harm. He knew some would come looking. Not to understand, but to replicate, to weaponize what he had built, without grasping why it worked. So he left traps, soft ones. In one entry, he described a harmonic structure that would seem functional, until activated. Then it would collapse, creating only silence. Not destruction, not injury, just nothing. That was the worst punishment he could imagine for those who sought power without thought. To give them emptiness. Yet even in deception, he left breadcrumbs. Small notes, hidden in syntax. Phrases that could be deciphered if the reader was paying attention. Hints that the real answer was behind the one they'd found. To some, this made him a manipulator. To others, a guardian. But the journals remained, and those who read them in full always walked away changed, not because they found power, but because they found a man who had chosen mercy again and again, and still called himself Sith. That contradiction disturbed them. They expected scars. They found diagrams. They expected death counts. They found warnings. He once wrote, "If the only measure of power is how many lives it takes, then the Force has already lost its meaning." Some dismissed the journals entirely, said he was a fraud, a failed alchemist with delusions of wisdom. But others kept copies, made notes in the margins, left them in places where future seekers might find them. Not because they agreed, but because, somewhere in the silence between lines, they heard something rare, a Sith telling the truth about how not to fall. And that truth, soft as it was, endured longer than fire. He left no empire, no temple, no monument carved into stone, only a name and questions. Darth Vectivus vanished from the records with less violence than a footnote. He had no public death, no known duel, no apprentice rising in a blaze of betrayal, just a slow fading from the edges of Sith memory. And yet, his shadow lingered longer than most who burned, because what he left behind couldn't be destroyed. His holocrons reappeared in places the Sith thought secured. Journals passed hand to hand in whispered circles. Some were dismissed, some were feared, all were read, and the deeper they were studied, the more discomfort they caused. Because they didn't promise power. They didn't feed ambition. They didn't scream for conquest. They whispered, softly, clearly, and, in that softness, was something the Sith had never prepared for. A legacy they could not command. He had obeyed the rule of two, and changed its meaning. He had taught a single apprentice, and refused to break her. He had explored the dark side, and asked it to explain itself. And in doing so, he broke the cycle without shattering it. He showed that restraint wasn't weakness. That clarity could be a weapon sharper than fear. Most Sith who followed dismissed him. But a few, a very few, understood what he had done. They copied his methods in secret. Not his teachings, his patience. They hid their emotions behind control, not cruelty. They studied the darkness, but did not drown in it. They were rare, easy to overlook, but Vectivus had not built an order. He had planted a pattern, and patterns are harder to kill than people. His name was never spoken with the reverence of Revan, or the fear of Nihilus. He was not whispered like Bane, or hunted like Plagueis, but in quiet corners of the galaxy, in moments where the Force trembled without violence, his work endured. Even those who hated his legacy could not deny its reach. A Sith Lord once attempted to destroy every trace of Vectivus's journals. He burned pages, erased files, silenced anyone who had quoted them. 3 years later, he recreated one of Vectivus's resonance chambers, from memory, and never admitted where the design came from. Because Vectivus had never asked for followers. He had asked for questions. And questions, once asked, cannot be unasked. That was his power. Not to dominate, to persist. He didn't build a new Sith philosophy. He revealed an old truth. That fear, when understood, doesn't need to be obeyed. And that darkness, when respected, doesn't need to consume. Even Jedi historians debated his existence. Some claimed he was a fiction, a Sith propaganda tool to make themselves appear civilized. Others believed he was real, but dangerous in a different way. A Sith who proved the dark side, could be calm, could be deliberate, could be human. Because if that were true, then the war between light and dark was not about method. It was about emotion. And if that line could blur, even once, then all doctrine began to crack. That was why he was feared. Not because of what he destroyed, because of what he didn't. His chambers are gone, his asteroid lost, but his legacy survives. In the silence between extremes, not as a call to power, as a question that still haunts the Force. What if a Sith could choose not to fall? The mines had long since gone quiet. There was no more ore to extract, no more workers wandering the tunnels, no more illusions to test. Only air, cold, still, and watching. At the heart of the asteroid, a single chamber remained active, untouched by decay, undisturbed by time. Its walls pulsed faintly with resonance, not because they were broken, but because they remembered. Vectivus had not sealed it. He had not locked it. He had simply stopped leaving it. For years, he lived there, not as a recluse or a madman, but as a man who had done enough. The machinery still worked. His journals updated themselves with quiet flickers. The air filtration system hummed like a whisper from another life. But he didn't experiment anymore. Not because he feared what he might find, but because he had already found it. Clarity. Most Sith chased immortality. He had never cared for that. They wanted to outlive death. He wanted to outlive noise. And so, in those final cycles, he lived with stillness. His presence in the Force barely noticeable. Like a low signal, waiting on a forgotten channel. He didn't meditate. He didn't train. He simply remained. Each day began the same. He would rise. Check the systems. Review the harmonic stability of the surrounding stone. Sometimes he would write. Small things. Reflections more than records. I dreamed of fire, one entry read, but not fear, only light. Maybe the stone remembers the sun. Even in silence, his mind continued to shape what others had feared. The resonance fields in the walls responded to him more than ever. Not violently, but gently. He could alter the pitch of reality with a breath. Slow a heartbeat in the next room, or speed it up. He no longer used that ability, but it remained, like a tool resting beside a craftsman, who no longer needed to build. His apprentice had not returned. She had made her choice. He had made peace with that. She would carry what she understood. She would abandon what she feared. That, too, was balance. He kept no holocom, no long-range transmitters, only proximity sensors. And even they were dull. Not because of neglect, but because so few things passed through this part of the galaxy anymore. Even pirates avoided it, as if the asteroid itself pulsed with warning. Still, he waited. Not for her. Not for the Jedi. Not for death. Just for the moment. When silence would shift. The Force, to him, was not a voice. It was a pattern. And sometimes, a pattern changed before it could be heard. He felt the shift 2 days before the arrival. A soft imbalance. Not threatening, just real. Something was approaching. Or someone. He didn't prepare. Didn't activate defenses. Didn't hide. He simply sat. And waited. The chamber accepted it. The stone accepted it. Vectivus had made this place not a fortress, but a listening post. For truths that didn't belong anywhere else. The force shifted again. And then, for the first time in years, the door opened. No alarm. No flare of aggression. Only light from the corridor. Soft footsteps. A pause. He did not turn. He simply said, "It's been a long time." And in that voice, quiet, old, unguarded, the resonance changed again. The chamber did not pulse with darkness. It pulsed with recognition. Because Vectivus had not died in that room. He had waited. Without anger. Without fear. Not for a challenge. Not for judgment. For a visitor. Who remembered. The man behind the name. The figure who stepped into the chamber did not ignite a weapon. They did not reach for the force. They simply stood there, letting the quiet settle around them. Vectivus didn't rise at first. He only studied the presence that had entered, not through sight, but through memory. It was familiar, not because of power, not because of history, because of honesty. Slowly he turned. The visitor looked older than he remembered. Lines across their face. Dust on their travel cloak. A faint tremor in the breath, as if the journey here had taken something out of them. But their eyes were the same. Steady. Measuring. Human. "Of all places," the visitor said softly, "you chose to stay here." Vectivus smiled. It was small, almost invisible, but real. "Where else would I go?" The visitor stepped closer, examining the chamber. The silent machines, the humming resonance arrays, the faint glow in the stone that seemed to breathe. "You never feared this place," they said, "even when others went mad in these halls." "I understood it," Vectivus replied. "And things we understand rarely frighten us." The visitor walked along the edge of the room. Their fingers brushed the carved grooves in the wall, tracing lines of memory, left by years of experiments. "You've been alone a long time." "Not alone," Vectivus corrected gently. "Just quiet." It wasn't a correction of pride. It was truth. He had not lived in isolation as punishment. He had chosen a life without noise. To someone else, that would have felt like a prison. To him, it was peace. The visitor studied him for a long moment. "You look tired." "I am," Vectivus admitted. "But not in a way rest can fix." The visitor sat across from him. No fear. No tension. Only presence. They had known each other before the Sith. Before holocrons. Before illusions. Back when Vectivus was simply a man. With a sharp mind. And a habit of asking too many questions. "Why come here now?" Vectivus asked. "You were waiting," the visitor said. "As if you knew I'd arrive." "I didn't know," he replied. "I hoped." The visitor exhaled, a sound carrying relief and ache. "So much of the galaxy fears you. Even those who study you don't understand you." "That isn't new," Vectivus said. "They think you were hiding something." "I was." The visitor raised a brow. "Myself," Silence settled again. Not heavy. Warm. "So what happened to your apprentice?" the visitor asked carefully. "She left," Vectivus said. "Not because she hated me. Because she feared what she saw in herself." The visitor nodded slowly. "She was like you. Too much," he said quietly. "And not enough." There was no regret in his voice. Only acknowledgement. "For all the things you built," the visitor murmured. "You never built a legacy for yourself." "I wasn't supposed to," Vectivus replied. "Legacies are for those who need to be remembered. And you don't." Vectivus shook his head. "I only needed to remain whole." The visitor looked at him with a softness that came from years of unspoken questions. "You did remain whole," they said. "Even now, even here." Vectivus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. "I'm glad," he said. "Because I feared, at the end, I might lose the part of me that was still human." "You didn't," the visitor said. "And that's why I came." Vectivus opened his eyes again. The resonance in the walls shifted, soft and low. For the first time in years, he wasn't the only heartbeat in the chamber. And for a man who had lived his life in balance, that was enough. They didn't speak for a long while. Not because there was nothing to say, but because so much had already been said. Across lifetimes, in silence, through choices. The visitor leaned back against the chamber wall. Vectivus sat across from them, legs folded, hands resting in his lap. It looked like meditation, but it wasn't. It was remembering. "You once told me," the visitor said quietly, "that the dark side wasn't evil, that it was simply unused potential, rotting in silence." "I remember," Vectivus nodded. "And I meant it." The visitor looked down at the stone beneath their boots. It pulsed faintly with warmth. Not anger, not hunger, just energy. "I didn't believe you back then," the visitor admitted. "I thought you were rationalizing, trying to make the Sith into something clean." Vectivus didn't respond. "I was wrong," the visitor said. This time, he looked up. Not to gloat, not to affirm, just to be present with the truth. "I never tried to clean the Sith," Vectivus said. "I just tried to see them clearly." "And did you?" He thought for a moment. "Yes. And I saw myself more clearly because of it." The visitor exhaled. Their voice dropped into something smaller, more human. "Do you regret any of it?" Vectivus didn't answer quickly. He let the question sit in the air, like a thread being pulled through memory. "No," he said at last. "Because I never pretended to be something I wasn't. Not even once." They both paused there. Two people who had known each other before the galaxy changed them. The visitor leaned forward. "I remember the day you left. You didn't say goodbye. You just left a note." Vectivus smiled faintly. "I knew if I tried to explain it out loud, I'd talk myself out of it." "What did the note say again?" He looked at them. It said, "Some truths can only be tested alone." The visitor nodded. "I kept that note." Silence again. Then the visitor stood slowly, stretching limbs stiff from long travel. They turned to look at one of the resonance crystals in the wall. Its glow was dim now, but steady. "What happens to this place when you're gone?" they asked. "Nothing," Vectivus replied. "It's not meant to last. It's meant to echo. They glanced at him. Echo what? Presence. Thought. Caution. Questions no one wants to ask. The visitor took a slow breath. And if someone dangerous finds it, they'll find what they're looking for, he said. And it will change them, or destroy them, as it should. The visitor looked down at the floor again. The resonance pulsed, soft, even. No darkness, no fear, just presence. You could have ruled planets, the visitor said. Led armies. Killed Jedi. Changed the course of history. I changed the part that mattered to me, Vectivus replied. Myself. The visitor's face shifted. Not to tears, but something close, like grief, and respect, and surrender, had all settled together in the same breath. I think I finally understand you, they said. Vectivus closed his eyes. And the visitor sat beside him again. Close, not as a guest, but as a friend. And I'm glad I do, they whispered. Before it's too late. He opened his eyes again, and this time the resonance in the room rose. Softly, like a song without words. Together they sat, no longer master and guest, no longer Sith and outsider, just two souls, in a room that remembered everything. Night didn't fall on the asteroid. There was no day to contrast it. Only the slow rhythm of time measured by internal systems, and the soft dimming of corridor lights that hadn't needed adjustment in decades. But in Vectivus's chamber, it always felt like dusk. Not dark, not lifeless, just settled. The visitor stood once more, their hand resting on the ancient wall as if it could speak. In a way, it could. Resonance had memory, and memory had weight. You're not afraid to die, they said. No, Vectivus answered calmly. Because I already accepted it. Years ago. But you stayed, the visitor pressed. Even after you could have left. You stayed. I stayed, he said, because the story wasn't finished yet. They turned toward him. But he wasn't looking at them anymore. His gaze had drifted slightly upward, as if watching something only he could see. I didn't write everything in holocrons, Vectivus said. Some lessons can't be encoded. The visitor stepped closer. You left something else. He nodded. Not a weapon, not a secret. Just a pattern. Woven into the stone. Into the frequencies. Something the Force can carry when the body no longer can. The visitor sat beside him again. Closer now. Will anyone understand it? They're not meant to, he replied. Not all at once. Silence fell again. But this time it was heavier. Not with tension. With closure. Vectivus closed his eyes, and the subtle hum in the walls responded, like a breath being drawn in and held. I wanted to tell you something, the visitor said. Vectivus opened his eyes slowly. I was angry when you left, they confessed. I thought you abandoned everything. The ethics, the structure, all the things that made you who you were. I did, Vectivus said. And I didn't. He looked over. I let go of the rules. But I never let go of myself. The visitor's throat tightened. And you didn't fall. No, Vectivus said quietly. I walked. That broke something. Not in pain. In understanding. The visitor reached out, not to offer help, not to stop anything, but simply to share space with the man who had lived exactly as he chose, and still chose it. "Will anyone ever believe your version of the Sith?" they asked softly. "I'm not a version," he said. "I'm an exception. That's different." His body was still strong, but his breathing slowed. Even the chamber felt it. The resonance didn't falter. It deepened, as if the asteroid itself was listening more closely now. "I think I was waiting for this," he said. "For death?" the visitor asked. "For presence." And then he smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't sad. It was whole. "I'll stay here," he whispered. "Not in spirit, not in shadow, just in pattern. If someone listens closely enough, they'll hear me." The visitor nodded. "I'll listen." Vectivus closed his eyes for the last time, and the resonance did not die. It lingered, not as power, not as fear, but as balance. He was gone, but he had not disappeared. Because Darth Vectivus did not burn through the galaxy like the others. He did not conquer. He did not fall. He remained, the only Sith who could. Because in the end, he was not a cautionary tale. He was a choice. And the Force remembered him, not as a shadow, but as the man Byes, who remained whole. There was no announcement, no farewell message, no disturbance in the Force that rippled through hyperspace. Darth Vectivus simply stopped appearing. One week, his asteroid facility sent out quiet but routine status reports. The next, nothing. Not a signal, not a transmission. Just silence, clean, intentional, unbroken silence. The systems continued running. The internal atmosphere remained stable. Lights flickered on, sensors calibrated. Maintenance drones hovered as if nothing had changed. But something had. The heartbeat of the place, its occupant, its mind was gone. The Force did not scream. It didn't wail or recoil. It grew still. Because when Darth Vectivus chose to leave the galaxy, he did so without anger, without fear, without the pain that so often followed Sith into death. This was not death. Not yet. Those closest to him, if such a word could be applied to anyone, noticed first. Not by evidence, but by feeling. An emptiness had replaced something once sharp and steady. A signature had faded. Not severed, not extinguished, just withdrawn. Like a candle being carried into another room. Some believed it was an illusion. Vectivus had been known to cloak entire corridors in false reality. He could blur the line between dream and truth with nothing but focus. So the silence wasn't feared. It was questioned. Was he still watching? Was he testing? Had he become the very illusion he once used to study others? No one dared approach at first. And when they finally did, they found everything exactly as it had been. Books untouched. Artifacts in place. Experiments powered down, but not abandoned. There were no signs of struggle. No broken glass. No recordings. No trails. Only a sealed door that led to his meditation chamber. And a locked resonance frequency that none could decode. The walls themselves had shifted subtly, tuned to a wavelength that no longer responded to human touch or droid interface. Like a frequency waiting for a voice that would never return. Some said he had ascended. Others said he had finally joined the illusions he so often conjured. There were rumors, quiet ones, that he had become one of them. Not a ghost, not a spirit, something in between. An echo designed not to haunt, but to observe. What frightened others most wasn't that he disappeared. It was that he seemed to want nothing from the world afterward. No domination, no legacy of blood, no ripple in the Force. Just absence. It wasn't passive. It was chosen. Vectivus did not die the way Sith were meant to. He did not scream into the void. He did not challenge fate, or murder an apprentice in a last attempt to cling to power. He stepped away, without needing to be seen. And the Force, curiously, allowed it. Perhaps it was because he asked for nothing, or because he had learned something no other Sith had. That to leave without echo was its own kind of mastery. And so, the asteroid remained. But the man at its center had become a question. Not a legend, not a myth, just a quiet memory, in a place where sound no longer mattered. Time forgot the place, but the Force didn't. The asteroid, once a humming center of corporate expansion and Sith research, remained sealed in orbit, cloaked in nothing but silence and distortion. Systems continued to run, life support stayed intact. But no one lived there. And yet, something was alive. The first recovery crew arrived 2 months after Vectivus vanished. They were not Force-sensitive. They had no reason to fear. But as they breached the outer levels, one by one, they began to hallucinate. One saw her father, dead 20 years, standing at the end of a hallway, smiling, bleeding. Another screamed that she was being watched through the walls. The third turned her blaster on her own shadow. None of it made sense. There were no toxins in the air. No pathogens in the filtration systems. No power anomalies. Just fear. Unprovoked, precise, and personal. It wasn't random. It wasn't environmental. It was chosen. And someone or something was still choosing. They sealed the place and never returned. Years passed. The asteroid became an unofficial no-fly zone, marked by old reports and whispered warnings. But Vectivus had been a Sith. That fact alone was enough to invite others. A team of Jedi archivists came next, cautious and trained in mental defense. They entered calmly, expecting to find remnants of alchemical tools, dark rituals, or corrupted holocrons. Instead, they found warmth. One reported feeling peace. Another described the place as a mind, with no thoughts, just memory. The third, a knight, walked to the center meditation chamber and knelt down, then wept. None of them explained why. And none of them ever spoke of the mission again. The High Council sealed their findings. But the Jedi weren't alone. Sith acolytes came too, hoping to claim his legacy, to steal what they believed Vectivus had hoarded. They didn't find treasures. They found mirrors. One saw their own corpse lying in the hall. One screamed that Vectivus was inside their mind. One simply walked into the dark and never came out. The place did not welcome them. And slowly, the Sith stopped sending anyone. That was the truth Vectivus had left behind. A place not designed to destroy invaders, but to reveal them. Not through torture, but reflection. The asteroid did not bleed like other Sith worlds. It did not whisper temptations or curse the ground with rot. It waited. And when you entered, it showed you something only you could see. A truth or a lie, but always one that cut just deep enough to make you question yourself. And those who couldn't face that left broken. Those who could left silent. Decades passed, and still the power remained undiminished. It didn't feed. It didn't grow. It simply echoed, as if Vectivus had folded his own presence into the structure itself. Not as a ghost, not as a trap, but as a question that could not be solved with the Force. Not dark, not light, just resonance. And it was that resonance that outlived him. That place never died, because it had never been alive the way people thought. It was a reflection of a man who never needed to conquer, only understand, and so it remained, not haunted, not sacred, just unchanged, a quiet monument to someone who knew how to vanish, without letting go. The dark side feeds on questions, and Darth Vectivus left behind only one. Where did he go? No death, no battle, no body, just absence. But absence, in the Sith tradition, is never accepted. It must be replaced by legend, by speculation, or by invention. The first theory came from the Sith themselves. They believed he had become something more ascended, not unlike Darth Andedu or Darth Nihilus, a being of will without form, a shadow that could not be unmade. But this wasn't faith. It was fear. Because if Vectivus had dissolved into the asteroid, if his consciousness had bonded to the structure, then his power had transcended the rule of two. And that made him dangerous. Too dangerous to speak of. So they didn't. The second theory came from the Jedi. They believed it was a trick. Vectivus, they said, had mastered illusion to such a degree that even his death might be a false projection, that he might still be alive somewhere hidden, watching, laughing quietly behind a wall of silence. The Council dismissed this, but the Jedi shadows didn't. Some believed he was still on the asteroid, deep within the gravity well, suspended in a pocket of twisted space-time, a chamber no one had found. Or worse, one everyone had found, but none could remember. That idea stayed in the archives, redacted, sealed, forgotten, but it never went away. The third theory wasn't from Force users at all. It came from corporate historians. They claimed he had simply retired. A man of numbers, of structure, of rationality. Vectivus had entered the Sith path not to dominate but to document. When his research was complete, they said, he walked away. Peacefully. Without regret. There were even rumors of a will. Assets distributed. Letters written. A farewell composed like a financial report. But that theory didn't explain the energy that remained behind. It didn't explain the apparitions, or the screams, or the calm. It explained a man, but not a Sith. The fourth theory came from the Force itself. Some Jedi, in deep meditation, claimed they had heard his voice. Not a ghost, not a presence, just a feeling. Like a thought left behind in a room, echoing off the walls. It said nothing. It promised nothing. It just lingered, like the moment between two breaths. Not life, not death, only memory. That theory couldn't be studied. It couldn't be confirmed. So it became myth. And that suited Vectivus just fine. Because all these theories shared one flaw. They searched for a conclusion. They looked for answers the way the Sith always did, through dominance, through certainty. But Vectivus was not like them. He didn't need to be remembered, only understood. And understanding can't be forced. Those who came to the asteroid seeking treasure left with scars. Those who came seeking power found only themselves. And those who came seeking the truth found a silence that stared back. A silence shaped by a man who had no need to be feared, only studied. There is no statue of Darth Vectivus, no tomb, no funeral, only a question left behind by a Sith who asked better ones than anyone else. No one ever found a body. No holocron with a final message. No trail of blood, no dying breath whispered into the Force. Just the asteroid. Just the feeling. Darth Vectivus vanished the way an equation vanishes, solved so perfectly it no longer needs to exist. But his legacy never stopped echoing. For centuries, travelers came and left. Some out of reverence, others out of greed, and a few out of something harder to name. They came alone, they came in teams, and one by one they left changed. Some saw the faces of people they had buried. Some heard voices from their own childhoods. Others watched themselves die again and again with perfect clarity. The dark side was strong there, yes, but not wild, not violent. It was studied. Every illusion felt designed, crafted, measured like a test. The asteroid didn't scream. It whispered. It didn't lure. It listened. And in that listening, it reflected. Even Darth Sidious, centuries later, would mention Vectivus in passing. Not as a threat, but as a curiosity. A Sith who wielded the dark side without being ruled by it, he wrote. A paradox, and perhaps a prototype. Yet even he didn't dare disturb the asteroid. Because there are powers in the galaxy that don't defend themselves with lightning. They defend themselves with truth. And nothing terrifies a Sith more than truth without anger. Vectivus's journals, those that survived, were found scattered. A few made it into Sith archives. A few were locked away in Jedi vaults. Others disappeared. They didn't contain great weapons or forbidden rituals. Only thoughts, ideas about darkness, about the mind, about fear, and what happens when it isn't weaponized but studied. Those writings never commanded armies, but they outlasted them. Because Vectivus had discovered something most Sith refused to accept. Immortality was not always a matter of survival. Sometimes it was a matter of restraint. He didn't become a god. He didn't haunt the stars. He became a question too quiet to erase. The asteroid still remains, uncharted but known. Ships avoid it, but a few still go. Pilots have reported strange gravity patterns. Instruments malfunction. Lights flicker. Time stutters. And every so often, a voice. Not loud, not clear. Just a tone, like memory carried on solar wind. Some say it's Vectivus, still alive somehow. Others say it's just the Force, holding on to a fragment of someone who never tried to conquer it. But there's no monument to Darth Vectivus. Only silence. Only resonance. And in that resonance, something even the Sith have forgotten how to recognize. Balance. The Jedi feared the dark, the Sith worshipped it. But Vectivus listened. He walked its halls like a student, not a tyrant. He studied its echoes, not its screams. And when the time came, he didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply returned to the stone, to the asteroid, to the place that had shown him who he was. And there he stayed, not dead, not alive, just present. A legacy without a body, a presence without a throne, a Sith who never needed to be one. And in a galaxy defined by conflict, his silence says more than war ever could. He never raised a fleet, never burned a city, never screamed through a battlefield with lightning in his hands, and yet he was a Sith Lord. Darth Vectivus, a name spoken in hushed tones, not because of terror but because of confusion. From the very beginning, he was different. He didn't seek pain. He didn't crave domination. He studied. He questioned. He listened to the Force in ways few dared to, and fewer still understood. In a galaxy shaped by conflict, he walked between definitions, not a Jedi, not a tyrant, not a savior, just himself. The Sith of his time whispered about him behind closed doors. Some called him a coward. Others said he was hiding some forbidden power, one too dangerous to reveal. But in truth, Vectivus didn't hide anything. He simply chose a path no one else did. He studied illusions, not to deceive but to understand perception. He researched fear not to weaponize it, but to learn how it shaped identity. He embraced the dark side without surrendering to it. And that broke the rules. The rule of two demanded cruelty. It demanded betrayal, legacy through death. But Vectivus believed in legacy through knowledge. He didn't see the Force as a weapon. He saw it as a language. And while most Sith screamed, he learned to whisper. He never lied to himself. That was the difference. While other Sith drowned in pride, wrath, or envy, Vectivus kept his mind clear. Even as he experimented with dark side energies that distorted space, spirit, and thought, he never lost himself. He knew what he was. He didn't justify it with trauma. He didn't blame others. He simply made a choice, and he accepted it. That terrified the others. Because if the dark side could be used without hatred, if the power didn't have to consume the soul, then every Sith before him had failed, and every Sith after him would question. He didn't need a throne. He didn't need applause. His work, the research, the holocrons, the journals was enough. He didn't pursue immortality, because he understood what most Sith never did. That eternity means nothing if you lose yourself to reach it. In the hollowed-out corridors of the asteroid he called home, the shadows did not scream. They listened. They echoed with voices from his past, not because he summoned them, but because he remembered. Family, friends, his apprentice, the ones he lost, the ones he let go. Most Sith erase their past. They see it as weakness. Vectivus kept his past alive, because it was real. Because it was his. And that memory, that fragile, human truth, made him stronger than they could understand. He walked through the dark without letting it enter him. He embraced the shadow without becoming its mask. He was not a contradiction. He was clarity. Darth Vectivus was not proof that the dark side could be mastered. He was proof that it didn't have to master you. And in a galaxy that worshipped extremes, that idea was dangerous. So they erased him from records. They dismissed him as a myth, a mistake, a scholar who strayed too far and left no mark. But his name remained, not on battlefields, not in statues, in the minds of those who wondered if balance was possible. The Sith called him weak. The Jedi called him fallen, but the Force said nothing. Because some truths are quiet, and some legends are not meant to rule, they're meant to remember. He was Darth Vectivus, and the darkness never swallowed him. It surfaced in a place it never should have been. Not in a vault, not in a Sith archive, not even in the ruins of the asteroid where Vectivus vanished. It appeared in a forgotten storage locker on a drifting survey ship, an unmarked container found wedged behind old sensor equipment. The crew thought it was scrap metal, a discarded tool, maybe even a damaged data core. They were wrong. When the first technician touched it, the room grew colder. Not with fear, but with focus, as if the holocron itself was deciding whether to wake. It was small, smooth-edged, faceted like polished stone. Black on one face, silver on the other. No carvings, no symbols, nothing that screamed Sith. It almost looked harmless. Holocrons built by other Sith demanded emotion, rage, dominance, violence. But this one demanded something far rarer. Calm. The technician didn't know the Force, didn't understand its currents or its dangers. And yet, the holocron opened for her. No surge of power, no blaze of crimson energy. Just a soft flicker, a presence. A man's voice, steady, intelligent, patient. "If you have opened this," the voice said, "then you are not my enemy." She dropped the holocron. But it didn't stop. And then it did something far stranger. It asked her a question. What is it you fear most when you are alone? Not a threat. Not a test of loyalty. Just a question spoken with such quiet understanding that it felt more like a reflection than a challenge. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But the holocron didn't punish her. It simply closed. Waiting. When Jedi eventually recovered it, they studied it cautiously. They expected traps, illusions, corruption. But the holocron resisted none of their defenses. It did not attempt to influence their emotions. It didn't tempt. It didn't whisper. It didn't twist the air with dark side intent. It only opened when the Jedi were still, truly still. And inside, Vectivus spoke. Not as a conqueror, not as a monster, as a teacher. He spoke of emotional resonance, of illusions crafted from the subconscious, of the dangers of burying grief and the power found in examining it. He spoke of the asteroid not as a fortress, but as a laboratory of memory. He did not share forbidden rituals. He didn't offer shortcuts to immortality. He didn't preach about dominance or destiny. Instead, he asked questions. What do you gain by hating those who hurt you? What do you become when fear makes your choices for you? What power is worth losing yourself to claim? The Jedi who listened were unsettled, not because the teachings were dark, but because they weren't. They were balanced, measured, precise. Too precise for comfort. Some on the council believed the holocron was a trick, a Sith trap disguised as wisdom. But others knew better. This was not deception. This was the voice of a man who studied the dark side without drowning in it. A man who understood his own shadow well enough to walk beside it. And the holocron itself seemed to understand something too. It never forced answers. Never revealed everything. Never tried to lead its listener toward a single conclusion. It only reflected the mind of the one holding it. For some, it felt like a warning. For others, a mirror. For a rare few, a guide. It did not spread across the galaxy. It did not reshape orders or philosophies. It simply waited. For the right listener. for the right moment, for someone who understood that darkness did not need to consume, a holocron that taught not how to conquer, but how to remain whole. Just like the man who made it, he left no wound in the galaxy, no broken fleets drifting in silence, no worlds burned in his name, no Jedi scattered to the winds, haunted by his shadow. He left behind no empire, no crater, no scar. And that, in the eyes of many Sith, made him forgettable. But for those who understood, it made him terrifying. Because Darth Vectivus proved something that should have been impossible. That the dark side did not need to destroy you to serve you. That you could master its knowledge, without letting it master you. He didn't rewrite the code of the Sith. He didn't rebel. He simply declined to collapse into the spiral that swallowed nearly every Dark Lord before him. There were no temples carved in his image, no armies bearing his crest, no cults whispering his name in the shadows. And still, his legacy endured. Not in the Force, not in blood, but in doubt, because every Sith that came after, every monster who believed pain was the only path to power, had to wonder, what if they were wrong? What if there was another way? A way that didn't end in betrayal, or madness, or death. It was the kind of thought the Sith could never allow. So, they buried him. Not by blade, not by decree, but by omission. His name was quietly scrubbed from archives, his holocrons sealed behind layers of silence. His writings, those that weren't destroyed, labeled as incomplete or irrelevant. And still, the story survived. Whispers, fragments, ghosts, the occasional scholar or Force-sensitive who found themselves pulled toward something different. Something that didn't promise domination or salvation, but understanding. They would find an old asteroid with strange energies, or a broken datapad with a signature that didn't match the usual Sith madness. And in that quiet discovery, they would feel it. Not power, not fear, balance. Vectivus left no wound, but he did leave a question. A question that echoed through time louder than any scream. What if a Sith didn't have to fall? What if one could walk into the dark and come back? That question lingered like a soft vibration in the Force. A resonance, not of conflict, but of clarity. Not all who sought the answer found peace. Some were driven mad, trying to reconcile it. Some used his example as justification for their own twisted choices. But a few, the rare few, understood. And that understanding was more dangerous to the Sith than any rebellion. Because Vectivus didn't prove the Sith code wrong, he proved it incomplete. He proved that passion didn't have to mean violence. That strength didn't have to mean cruelty. That power didn't have to mean loss. And in doing so, he unraveled something deeper. The fear that lay beneath the Sith's endless hunger. The fear that if they stopped taking, they would disappear. Vectivus didn't disappear. He stepped back, watched, taught, remembered. And when the time came, he let go. No explosion, no duel, no throne left empty. Only silence. And in that silence, the Force held its breath. Because Vectivus didn't conquer. He endured, not through legend, but through the one thing the Sith never understood. Restraint. His story was never meant to last. Not in a galaxy that remembers blood better than mercy. not among Sith, who measured greatness by the pain they left behind. And yet, his name still lingers. Not shouted, whispered. Vectivus, the Sith who should not exist. A contradiction that refused to collapse. A shadow that never became a storm. He didn't fight to be remembered. He didn't build monuments. But in choosing not to destroy, he became unforgettable. His legacy isn't carved in stone. It's carved in hesitation. In the pause before a blade is drawn. In the question that haunts every student of the dark. Is this the only way? For centuries, that question has echoed. Not loudly, but deeply. Through journals left behind. Through stories dismissed as myth. Through Force echoes trapped inside the haunted shell of that lonely asteroid. His laboratory is silent now, but it breathes. Illusions flicker. Thoughts linger. And for those who enter with open minds, he still teaches. Not how to kill, not how to conquer, but how to look inward and not turn away. His end was not a battle. It was a choice. To vanish quietly, knowing he had broken no codes, but bent them into something no Sith had dared before. Not redemption, not rebellion, balance. And that balance, fragile, forgotten, still waits for the one who can hold it, without fear. Because some legacies do not roar. They hum, just beneath the silence,